1045 The Team, 1045theteam.com. On the phone right now, bracketologist Patrick Stevens, nationally known and widely successful at Bracketology, which has become a major I wish I had had in college. And Patrick, you put together the field before the field comes out. Field officially gets released on Sunday. What are the things you're looking at when you're building the bracket?
Well, I think certain factors tend to be really heavily considered by the selection committee year in and year out. I think two that really stand out. On the good side, I think teams on the edge of the field that have done well on the road and really have those strong signature victories away from home are teams that tend to be rewarded when it really comes down to the last couple spots. And I think on the flip side of things, a team that's played a poor non-conference schedule is almost universally punished if they're really right on the edge of the field. So those are two things in particular that tend to be pretty good guideposts for sorting out at least some of the teams right there for the last couple spots.
What teams are the most likely to be the number one seeds when the brackets come out on Sunday?
Well, I think you're looking right now at one team that's really, really locked in on that top line, and that's Kansas. I think the Jayhawks had the best regular season by a pretty significant margin out of everybody. And then you start looking at a bunch of other teams. There's realistically probably about 7 teams that can still make it up to the top line. Oklahoma out of the Big 12, Villanova and Xavier out of the Big East, Virginia and North Carolina out of the ACC, Michigan State in the Big 10, Oregon in the Pac-12. If you put me on the spot right now, I'd say Kansas, Oklahoma, Villanova, and Virginia. But clearly there's still enough games left here over the next few days that can and probably will change.
Bracketologist Patrick Stevens with us, 1045 The Team and 1045theteam.com.
Right here in Albany, the Times Union Center hosted the MAC Championship. Iona takes down Monmouth. Does Monmouth have enough to get an at-large bid in this year's tournament?
Even though there's a little bit more wiggle room for this year's tournament, remember there's no SMU, which would be in the tournament if it was eligible. There's no Louisville, same deal there. You look at Monmouth, and it's going to depend on ultimately what the committee decides to value the most. Monmouth clearly let down by some of the teams that it beat early in the season that everybody thought was really going to help them out. The victory over UCLA, the victory over Georgetown just didn't hold up. And so they're left with 2 pretty good victories on neutral courts against Notre Dame and Southern Cal. But just about everybody around that spot in the field has a couple decent victories. So you look at the Hawks, they've got those 3 really bad losses at Army, at Manhattan, at Canisius, all teams outside the top 200 of the RPI, and that's really a differentiator, and I think that's ultimately going to sink the Hawks. On the plus side for Monmouth, if the committee decides that simply a raw number of victories away from home is something they want to reward this year, Monmouth has those in spades, 17 of them outside of West Long Branch. But I tend to think that the Hawks will be off to the NIT here come Sunday night.
Patrick, as somebody does every year, I've been waging the battle this week on mid-majors versus power conference teams. I want to see a Monmouth in the tournament. I want to see a St. Mary's in the tournament. And I don't want to see the 8th team from the SEC. I don't want to see Florida. I'm against Syracuse being in and Pitt and all these teams. Why is it that the mid-majors get hosed, for lack of a better word, when it comes to the 8th team from a power conference?
Well, the problem is it comes down to scheduling, and you can sit there and say that a mid-major, the teams won't go and play them, and that's a fair complaint. But the reality is if you're Monmouth, you're stuck playing a lot of games against teams that do you absolutely no good whatsoever, and you just don't have as many opportunities to distinguish yourself as Syracuse might. It's a process that. Probably at its best, given the current setup where you have a committee of administrators and athletic directors and stuff like that, at its best, you're probably just dissecting the data as opposed to actually assessing coaching strategies and tactics and that sort of thing. And so the numbers are going to sort themselves out a little bit. I would also say I do think it's been a largely down year at the mid-major level beyond those top really 7 conferences or so. I mean, this is probably the worst year for the Mountain West since it was created almost 20 years ago. You look at a league like the West Coast Conference, It was a really touch-and-go situation, still is, as to whether that can be a multi-bid league this year. The Missouri Valley wasn't as strong. And so there's a little bit of a imperfect storm there, too, where you just didn't have as many teams distinguish themselves in the early going. And then you go and you have the likes of Monmouth and Valparaiso stumble in their conference tournaments. I think both of those teams would be plenty capable of doing some damage in the field of 68, but there just weren't as many opportunities, especially for a Valpo, to really distinguish itself once league play arrived.
Let's talk about the school that's 2 hours west of us here in Albany, Syracuse. Jim Boeheim's squad. Do you see them getting into the NCAA tournament?
That is a really, really good question, and I think they're right there on the edge of the field. Would probably lean against at the moment, but it's a situation where they're in the clubhouse and they're kind of waiting for everybody to come through and place 16, 17, and 18. And if some teams stumble down the stretch, they might be able to back their way in. We mentioned a little bit earlier the road victories, and Syracuse has 2 victories away from the Carrier Dome that really, really stand out. One of them at Duke, another one over SEC regular season champ Texas A&M in the Bahamas during the Thanksgiving tournament. And also not to be forgotten, if Syracuse finds itself on the edge of the field and St. Bonaventure is there as well, Syracuse does have a head-to-head win there. That's certainly possible to ignore if you come out and you evaluate the entirety of everything and say St. Bonaventure's better. But if they're the last couple teams sitting there and you're kind of evaluating them, that could be an asset for the Orange as well. But there's obviously a lot of teams that Syracuse has to be rooting really against as much as anything else here over the next couple days. But I do think that it still does have some hope despite the really lousy finish to the regular season, and then obviously the first round flame out in the ACC tournament.
I understand you want Syracuse to root against certain teams to lose, but why not in the sense hope teams like Notre Dame and St. Bonaventure run the table in their conference tournament? Syracuse has a win over Notre Dame, despite not having Demetrius Jackson. They have that win over St. Bonaventure. So is there a chance that if those 2 teams do well in their conference tournament, possibly win it, that helps Syracuse's resume and actually gets them into the tournament?
Yeah, and that's certainly possible, too. I mean, the Notre Dame winning is not going to change the makeup of the field. If St. Bonaventure makes it to even the A-10 title game, I think it's going to be safely in regardless. So that would certainly help out Syracuse. I did notice that this morning that its RPI has tumbled all the way down to 72, and that I don't know if there's anybody that's been quite that low. I think we've seen 1 or 2 teams in the 70s get at-large bids over the years. So Syracuse might be a little bit of a trend breaker if they make it, but it's a team that obviously has to have a lot go right for it here over the next 3 days.
Patrick Stevens, bracketologist, with us, 1045 The Team, 1045theteam.com, nationally known and very successful at this bracketology. And Patrick, I ask you one question that's more of an opinion question. Another thing I've been waging the battle on for years is the first 4 games and my anger that always we get to 16 seeds put in the first 4 games. And I come to you from this perspective that the year Maryland won the titles, they beat Siena in the first round, and Siena had won their conference tournament and had to play a first 4 game. Albany 2 years ago had to play a first 4 game. These teams that win their conference tournament should be in the tournament, right? Not off the side in this supplementary play-in game bracket, right? Tell me you
agree with that. I mean, although I will point out that there is actually a benefit for the conferences that these teams are in to play in that game. The way the NCAA divvies up the money from the NCAA tournament is that every team that makes the field represents 1 unit, which is I don't remember the exact amount of money, but let's say it's like $250,000 a year for 6 years. Every time you win a game, you get another unit. So if Albany goes to that, to the first 4 a couple years back and wins, the America East gets 2 units, twice as much money over a 6-year span as a result of winning that game. So there is a benefit there for the team that wins. For the team that loses, yes, it's absolutely getting shuffled off. But for conferences that are in 1-bid territory, there really are worse things than getting shipped off to Dayton for that Tuesday or Wednesday game.
All right, so as long as you win it, then I don't have to be as angry. But if Albany loses or Siena loses in the first 4, I'm going to be mad again, Patrick.
There you go.
1045 The Team, 1045theteam.com. Bracketologist Patrick Stevens breaking it down with us here with Brady and Gaz. Selection Sunday is on Sunday, and chances are Patrick Stevens will have had the field pretty much correct before then. So go find his bracket and then compare it to the field. Patrick, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, fellas.